Hi again, everyone. Jeremy Plonk here from First Bet and Express Bet, and welcome in to the It's Official podcast, created by Jeff Siegel. Proud to be your host. We've got 5 hot topics for you each and every week in horse racing. And now with the Breeders' Cup World Championships at Del Mar just 17 days away as we drop this podcast coming up on Halloween, October 31st, and Saturday, November 1st, it is time to talk Breeders' Cup. All 5 topics this week will be a look at the divisions in the Breeders' Cup. We're making news here in recent weeks and as we get geared up for the big championship day. Don't worry, we're going to have a Stara tomorrow and a Goosebump Award winner for you as well. They're all going to come in the same segment, so stick around for that. Little change in the format this week, but we are absolutely ready to talk some Breeders' Cup. A reminder that the Breeders' Cup first wager guide will be out after the pre-entries are announced. So we're about 10 days away or so from that going down. And when pre-entries are announced the Wednesday before Breeders' Cup, we'll be out with that wager guide. You'll be able to check out all the stats and trends. Been working hard on that over the last several weeks and months to get you ready for Breeders' Cup 2025. A lot to dissect when we've got 14 divisional races. We'll talk about 5 of those divisions here this week on the program. Let's start right off the top, and we lead with the lead, if you will, in newspaper terms. We've got ourselves a classic. It may be the anchor race of the Breeders' Cup. Historically, it's going to kind of fall mid-card again this year because of television, but what a Breeders' Cup classic we've got brewing. I mean, we'll talk about the different headlines in each of these divisions, but this is a Breeders' Cup classic that you're really excited to see because you've got super quality 3-year-olds. You've got the good older horses. You've got an unprecedented top 3 in the Breeders' Cup classic coming back to repeat and run against each other again. We just don't see that in modern racing. Let's cross our fingers, hope it all stays together. Again, we still got 18 days until the classic to get to that one, 17 to the championship Friday. So Breeders' Cup Classic looking absolutely phenomenal right now. Let's take a look at the headlines towards the classic division. Sovereignty can close a historic campaign with a win in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Of course, we remember American Pharoah winning the Triple Crown and then winning the Breeders' Cup Classic back in 2015. But no horse has done the Derby, the Belmont, the Travers. Remember, that's the race that American Pharoah wasn't able to take down and then go on to win the Breeders' Cup Classic. So Sovereignty's got a chance to do something no horse has done before, going back to the beginning of the Breeders' Cup in 1984. And I'll tell you, the way that he finished up the last time we saw him in the Belmont Stakes, everything's come up roses since then. Here's Sovereignty, the last time we saw him in action in the Travers.
With those big, powerful strides, Bracket Buster on the inside, and Sovereignty and Bracket Buster a long way back to Magnitude in third. They're in the final furlong, and we are witnessing greatness. Sovereignty pouring it on, and for the first time since 1995, we have a Kentucky Derby, Belmont, and DraftKings Travers winner as Sovereignty rolls home to win by more than 8 lengths. Congratulations to Belmont. There's your Travers.
And Sovereignty put up a huge number in that. If you were a subscriber to the Buyer Speed Figures, 115 career high in that one. He won by 10. Bracket Buster, the runner-up, came back to win the Oklahoma Derby. Magnitude, third, beaten 20 lengths, came back to run a decent second in the Pennsylvania Derby behind Baeza. Of course, Baeza, the horse Sovereignty dispatched in the Derby and the Belmont Stakes. Sovereignty, the headliner to a classic that normally would have been about the 4-year-olds. We've got the top 3 finishers from last year's Breeders' Cup Classic all back, and they're in really good form. I mean, you can't really knock the form of last year's runners. You've got last year's winner, the Sierra Leone, coming off a really good campaign this year. He had kind of a puzzling race at the start of the year in the Stephen Foster, but his win in the Whitney was dead spot on. Jockey Club Gold Cup second in there. Now he's looking ahead to the main race, and I think Sierra Leone's going to come up to the race excellent for trainer Chad Brown. It's been a light campaign, just 4 starts this year for Sierra Leone. Of course, we know he loves it at Del Mar, having won in the race last year. Then you got last year's runner-up, Fierceness, and Fierceness has had an excellent campaign this year as well. He had the one blip in the Whitney where he just kind of stopped when he made the lead in the head of the stretch, but he certainly exacted that and more when he came back in the Pacific Classic, back to Del Mar, and ran such a cracker winning that race by 3 1/4 over the good 3-year-old journalism. So Fierceness is in great form coming into this year's race. And of course, Forever Young from Japan won his only only prep. We saw Forever Young in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai earlier this year, and then Forever Young came back in Japan and won his local prep race handily. Didn't take on much in that, but he's coming up to the race the right way. Top 3 from last year's Breeders' Cup Classic, expected to be back. And some of the others that were in behind that day also back. Highland Falls and some of those kind of runners who've had good years in their own right. Let's go back to last year's Breeders' Cup Classic, Gate the Wire with Larry Comas on NBC Sports. This was a good one, and we just might see it again.
They're off in the Breeders' Cup Classic. City of Troy broke near the back of the pack. Arthur's Ride out for the lead. Fierceness is away well. Outside of them, it's Newgate. Irma Sotagake is right there to their inside. Inside of them, Mixto, Highland Falls, and Forever Young along the rail. So as they pass by the stands for the first time, it is Irma Sotagake the leader, with Mixto running along in second. Forever Young is third, and will have the rail as they race into that turn. Irma Sotagake on top. Now Fierceness has moved up into contention now. He's second on the outside. Then Forever Young, Mixto, and Arthur's Ride. 22.43 was a sharp opening quarter mile. Newgate is 5 lengths off the lead. Then Highland Falls, a big separation to Pyrenees, and next another gap back to Sierra Leone. City of Troy near the back of the pack with Senor Buscador, and then Tapatrai Sanushpa Tesoro. Oh, the half was 44.96 seconds. So up the backstretch they go. Irma Sotagake in front with Fierceness a length behind. Then Forever Young and Arthur's Ride. Newgate is 5th outside of horses. Mixto being ridden to keep up, so too Highland Falls. Then Sierra Leone, Pyrenees, and Senor Buscador. City of Troy is being motivated near the back of the pack. He has not been involved so far. Around the far turn, Fierceness. Fierceness has taken over the lead. Newgate on the attack. Sierra Leone is revving up on the far outside with a burst toward the front runners as they come to the top of the stretch. And they're into the stretch. And Sierra Leone has circled up on the outside to take the lead. Fierceness battles on second. Newgate behind them. Forever Young on the far outside. Sierra Leone. Fierceness digs in. Newgate. Forever Young. Sierra Leone close to home. Sierra Leone does it in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Fierceness was second. Forever Young was third. Newgate fourth. And then came Senor Busca.
You forget how hot that pace was. 44-4, 109-2 for the fractions at 1.25 miles. It set up beautifully last year for Sierra Leone. What a gutty performance by Fierceness in that one, and Forever Young, who were up close to that pace set by Irma Sotagake, and they both were in it in the in the frame there, finishing second and third, both coming off wins and looking good coming up to this year's Breeders' Cup Classic. Should be an absolutely fabulous race. We take a look at some of the other headlines, not only the rematch from last year, not only Sovereignty, but what about Mindframe and some sophomores who add big-time depth to this year's Breeders' Cup Classic? Mindframe's a horse who the rider was knocked off coming out of the gate last time out in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, but earlier this year, he rattled off victories in the Churchill Downs handicap. Probably the race of the year at 7/8 of a mile. Was a fabulous race where he won about a 5-6 horse melee that day in a fantastic performance. Then came back and won the Stephen Foster at Churchill Downs, where he beat Sierra Leone on the square at 1 1/8 under the Twin Spires. Mindframe was set really in a horse of the year kind of campaign, and then things just went haywire out of the gate at the Jockey Club Gold Cup, where the jockey Irado Ortiz Jr. was knocked off, and the horse never got a prep. So we have not seen Mindframe really in a race since June 28th. Todd Pletcher, Rapoli Stables, Elias Stables, the St. Elias Stables, they opted to train up to the Breeders' Cup with Mindframe and not get a prep now. We'll see how that works in terms of the training. He's been training at the Oklahoma Training Track, Saratoga, across the street from the main track proper there. And Mindframe is horse of the year with a victory. I mean, I think with all the older horse races, if he beats Sovereignty on the square, added to the Stephen Foster, and again, that Derby Day Churchill Downs handicap was a race of races. That was absolutely a fabulous race, and he won it that day. I mean, I think that'd be hard to deny Mindframe horse of the year if he can pull off a victory, especially if he can do it with no prep, basically, since the month of June 28th in the Stephen Foster. Mindframe certainly adds depth to this year's Breeders' Cup Classic, as do some very good 3-year-olds. We've already talked about Sovereignty. He's going to be the favorite in the Classic. But what about the other horses like Baeza and Journalism? Journalism, of course, the Preakness winner. He was the beaten favorite in the Kentucky Derby. He had his number. Sovereignty had his number in the Triple Crown Series, beating him in the Derby by a length and a half, beating him in the Belmont Stakes by 3. But you look at the Pacific Classic, you got a race over the track for Journalism. He ran there as a maiden, broke his maiden over the track last year. He's been able to stay on the West Coast. He's going to be running out of a home stall in the Breeders' Cup. There's a little advantage. Maybe that tilts to Journalism here as they go back to Del Mar. And the one thing about Journalism I really like, even more so than Baeza, the other good 3-year-old who adds depth to this crop, this is the first time ever in his form cycle that Journalism is going to come into a race fresh. He started out, and he has been in absolute training mode since he hit the racetrack more than a year ago. I know his layoff line from December to March looks similar to this when he came back and won the San Felipe, but he was supposed to run in the Bob Lewis Stakes in between there and came up with a little bit of a fever and missed the Bob Lewis Stakes back in February. He was in race mode training leading into that race in February. He has never had a break. So by running in the Pacific Classic in August, that gave them a time to take a little bit off. September, now into October, it's going to be over 2 months between races for Journalism, between the Pacific Classic and the Breeders' Cup Classic. If there is a time for him, a lot of people think he has plateaued, and on numbers, a 102, 105 buyer looks like about the best he can do. So what he's done so far in that form cycle. But a lot of times when a horse gets a little bit of rest and they come back, you're going to see improvement from him a lot of times. I wouldn't be surprised if Journalism has a move forward in him. Obviously, he's going to need to make up between 1.5 and 3 lengths on Sovereignty. You've got to beat the older horses. He got beat 3 lengths in the Pacific Classic by Fierceness. So he's got to make up 3 lengths on the good horses in this division, the top players. But maybe with that freshness, he'd be one to consider. It's an excellent race. We haven't even mentioned the Dubai World Cup winner from this year, Hit Show. He's kind of like an afterthought. And anytime a Dubai World Cup winner is probably one of the longest shots on the tote board, you know you have a great Breeders' Cup Classic. Can't wait to see it. We're going to talk much more about it as we get closer to the big event. But let's now go to our second big topic this week, and we go to another division. We know the Classic's a great division, but who dat and the distaff? I mean, who's left to go? This is a division that's sort of fallen apart throughout the course of the year. As we take a look at our headlines for the Breeders' Cup Distaff, Torpedo Anna not expected to be back to defend her title. She was last year's Horse of the Year. She was a great 3-year-old who rose up last year in the fall to beat the Elders. It was without Idiomatic in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and that certainly helped her. Now she won't be back to defend the title this year, much like Idiomatic wasn't back in 2024. Cavalieri was supposed to be the best of the West, but she won't make it for Bob Baffert. He has another one, though, in Seismic Beauty. So we'll take a look at Seismic Beauty and stack her up as the likely favorite now in this year's Breeders' Cup Distaff. And the Oaks crowd just didn't hold up in this sophomore class. When you think back to the Kentucky Oaks and the horses that were, in dominance at that time of year, they've fallen by the wayside. We have some 3-year-olds to consider, like Nitrogen and also Clico. But the major players in this division are probably the older horses this year. Darth Vader, of course, winning in New York, but she's always been kind of the underdog and never the favorite. Jin pulled an upset in the race at Keeneland in the Spinster Stakes when she beat the 3-year-old Nitrogen. Nitrogen was stepping up to take on Elders, but Jin not expected to be at the top of the class, and she's doing really well right now for trainer Brendan Walsh. But this is a Breeders' Cup distaff that is looking for a leader. Because here's from trainer Kenny McPeak on his X feed today at the Kenny McPeak. This is Torpedo Anna. This is where she's at right now. She's at Magdalena Farm, which is McPeak's farm outside Lexington. So Kenny was there feeding her by hand and enjoying a nice sunny day, turned out in the field. This is Torpedo Anna, again, from today, October 14th. Again, thanks to Kenny McPeak. This was posted on X, courtesy of his feed to use this on the podcast. But this is not the look of a filly who's headed towards the Breeders' Cup Distaff, right? And he has intimated in recent days that he thinks that she's probably run her last race, and this would certainly give you that indication. I mean, Torpedo Anna, if she doesn't make the Breeders' Cup Classic, the postscript on her career is going to be, a disappointing loss in her last race. Of course, a real no-effort show-up in the Spinster Stakes when she was fourth, beaten 8.5 lengths. But she won 12 of 16 in her racing career, 2 second-place finishes. She had a mystifying 7th in La Troyenne with a little bit of trouble and running back quickly earlier this year, and now a second mystifying effort where she just gave it up after she didn't make the lead in the Spinster Stakes last time out. If indeed she is done in passing the baton, which very well might be the case, then who takes over favoritism for this year's Breeders' Cup? It is very likely to be Seismic Beauty. The way she dominated at Del Mar and the Clement Hirsch is going to have her in the favorites role.
Rambles around the far turn with a 2-length lead. Her stablemate Ricci comes to take her on now on the outside. Royal Spa's third. Copian has been under pressure, but she is gaining ground on the outside. They're into the stretch. Seismic Beauty by the 8th pole in front by 3. Copian is closing the gap on the far outside. Then Ricci. Seismic Beauty in front. Copian second on the outside, but Seismic Beauty rumbles home in the Clement Hirsch. Copian was second, Ricci was third, and Royal Spa was fourth.
Seismic Beauty, she hasn't done much wrong of late. Obviously, this year, she's 3 for 5. She started her career 1 for 4, though, and you're looking at a filly who was eligible for a first-level allowance as of mid-March this year. I mean, she didn't get through that condition, actually, until April the 18th in her 5th career start, but she won that day by 10. Then she stepped up to the stakes ranks and won the Santa Margarita by 5. Not favored in that spot, but she was favored in the Clement Hirsch, as you saw there, where she won over the track at Del Mar. She's 2 for 3 at Del Mar. She was beaten a neck in her career debut there. We know she likes the track at Del Mar. She's fairly lightly raced with only 7 career starts, 4 of those wins for Bob Baffert. Seismic Beauty now looks to be the favorite in this year's Breeders' Cup Distaff for lack of other options. I mean, she's done nothing wrong, and her last 2 are big numbers, 104, 110, huge by her speed figures. But without Torpedo Anna, without the 3-year-olds having a star in this year's crop, you see how we get to that. Clico won the cotillion at 5-1, knocked off some of the fillies that we were looking at earlier in the year in terms of the top 3-year-old fillies. Then you've got the other 3-year-old filly, Nitrogen, who was a turf filly for much of the year, and the race was washed off the turf at Saratoga. The wonder again, she freaked on the dirt, and trainer Mark Cassidy said, well, maybe we have a dirt horse here. She went on to run second in the Belmont Oaks Invitational back on turf, then won the Alabama back on the dirt, and last time gave Jin a big run, beaten only ahead in the Spinster in her first start against older horses. She'll get a little bit of a weight break as a 3-year-old. Nitrogen certainly going to be one to consider in this year's Breeders' Cup Distaff, but there are no star 3-year-old fillies on the rise the way it looks to me. The older fillies and mares don't necessarily look like world beaters outside of potentially Seismic Beauty. So we'll see how she trains up to the race. But I think she's looking at fairly solid favoritism right now, the way things are shaking out in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. Darth Vader always runs her race. She never seems to run a bad one. If you look down through her running lines outside of the Kentucky Oaks, she's been on the Superfecta about 10, 12 starts in a row. She pulled the upset in the Ogden Fix earlier this year on Belmont Stakes Day, that in the slop. So I doubt we're going to get a wet track at Del Mar on November the 1st, but if it comes up wet, certainly Darth Vader would not have any issue with that. But Darth Vader, for trainer George Weaver, comes off a second last time, beating a nose in the personal ensign at Saratoga. She ran a good one head-to-head with Torpedo Anna when Torpedo Anna was running pretty good. And you could argue that maybe, just maybe, it was Darth Vader who knocked her out in that race, beating the nose in there in that race where they went head-to-head at Saratoga in the personal ensign. And then the non-response out of that race by Torpedo Anna knocked her out for the Spinster, and she didn't come back. Maybe taking that time off for Darth Vader will turn out to be a smart move by George Weaver to have the filly ready to go now for the Breeders' Cup. Had she come back with a prep in between, she might have been knocked out as well after that race with Torpedo Anna. So that's a look at the Breeders' Cup Distaff division. As we move on now to our third topic this week on It's Official, we're going to talk some 2-year-olds. We're going to get into some of our regular topics that we usually have on the Goosebump Award, and we're also going to get our Star of Tomorrow all in one shot. So let's talk Breeders' Cup Juvenile. The Juvenile misses out on a couple New York and Kentucky buzzsaws, and that's really the headline, as the Breeders' Cup Juvenile that could have been absolutely loaded still is top-heavy with Ted Naffy, who's been super, winning at Saratoga and winning at Keeneland. Of course, he comes off a win in the Breeders' Futurity last time out. He won the Hopeful Stakes by 8+. He's 3 for 3 lifetime. Ted Naffy for Todd Pletcher, expected to vie for favoritism and maybe be a pretty solid favorite in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Brandt in there for trainer Bob Baffert, 2 for 2 lifetime. He's a $3 million son of Gunrunner who was bet to 1 to 10 odds in the Del Mar Futurity when he was able to win that one. We'll take a look at Brandt's win last time out because it's been a little while since we saw him. They didn't go for the long prep. He's only run 5.5 and 7 furlongs to this point for trainer Bob Baffert. They skipped the 2-turn prep at Santa Anita to train up to the Breeders' Cup with Brandt. We'll remind you a little bit about his performance in the Del Mar Futurity in just a moment. Then you've got a couple horses that were part of the headline. These New York and Kentucky buzzsaws who would have added some serious juice to this year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Napoleon Solo ran away with the Champagne Stakes in New York most recently. I mean, he was he was the most impressive of the 2-year-old stakes preppers on that big weekend a couple weekends ago for trainer Chad Summers. But Summers fears a bounce. He gave the horse 30 to 45 days after running just explicitly fast fractions in that race and still going on to run away. It was a 1-turn mile. They expect a bounce, which would be a big regression, a poor effort after a strong effort like that. So they're going to send that horse to Florida, come back at Palm Meadows in the winter, and I would expect a Florida Derby type campaign for Napoleon Solo, but we're not going to see him for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Another one we're not going to see is named Further Ado. He's for Spendthrift Farm. He's trained by Brad Cox. He's not with Todd Pletcher, but Spendthrift also has Ted Naffy. And it's arguable, as good as Ted Naffy was in winning the Breeders' Futurity at Keeneland, the next week, Further Ado's maiden win may have been even more. In fact, it's last week's Goosebump Award winner. And this horse is your star of tomorrow. Watch him finish. Further Ado for Brad Cox.
And in the meantime, Further Ado is kicking on into the final furlong. 8 lengths to the good. Vino Vici, a distant second now to Brave Force in third. It is Further Ado well in front of the field. Iran Ortiz Jr. Further Ado wins it. It was Vino Vici who was across the line.
Pause back to second because it was a 20-length margin of victory for Further Ado. He's reportedly headed towards the Kentucky Jockey Club Stakes. That's the big 2-year-old race at Churchill Downs, run the day after Thanksgiving. Really exciting prospect there, Further Ado. Can't wait to see him. That time was fast. It wasn't that he just beat a weak field. He was faster than Ted Naffy ran in the Breeders' Futurity the week before, faster than Nyquist won when he won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile over that track at the same mile and a 16th distance. That was a fantastic mile and a 16th performance. It was a third career start. He was okay sprinting, but boy, when they stretched out, did this horse really blossom. Look forward to Further Ado moving forward. But as for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, Ted Naffy, Brandt, the 2 big names in there. Brandt was the horse who was just supposed to whip through the Del Mar Futurity. Desert Gate, his stablemate for Bob Baffert, gave him a little more tussle than anybody expected. And watch the paddling action with the leg that kind of sweeps and whirls and has that egg beater paddling action with Brandt. That's got some folks concerned whether or not he's going to stretch out around 2 turns and how long we're going to see Brandt run at a top-class level. It's hard to stay sound with that kind of inefficient leg action. Let's take a look at Brandt winning the Del Mar Futurity, but he worked hard for the money.
Brandt arrives at the quarter pole in front. His lead is about a length now. Desert Gate comes one off the rail to confront him at the top of the stretch. And they're joined by Litmus Test on the far outside. And they're into the stretch. And Brandt is put to the test by Flavian Pratt. Desert Gate in one. Hernandez making a race of it on the outside. Brandt is in front at the 16th pole. Desert Gate doing his all, but second best to Brandt in the Del Mar Futurity. He won it by a length. Desert Gate was second, Civil Liberty and Litmus Test.
Let it run through the gallop out there so you can see it wasn't necessarily a horse in Brandt who looked like he was begging to run farther after that race. He certainly put in a big effort that day. But Ted Noffey and Brandt, Todd Pletcher, Bob Baffert, historically, they've been wonderful in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And I believe between the two of them, they've split the last 4 2 apiece, winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Now, one note about Brandt in that race, his runner-up in there, Desert Gate, came back and was supposed to be the horse to beat in the 2-turn race at Santa Anita, the American Pharoah, but that was won by Intrepido, a really visually nice horse for trainer Jeff Mullins. I picked Intrepido in that spot. He will have to be supplemented now to the Breeders' Cup at $100,000. So will we see Intrepido move on to the Breeders' Cup? Reportedly, they think they will supplement and go to the Breeders' Cup. They do not have to pay that $100,000 until the pre-entry day, which is next Monday, and then the pre-entries will be announced on next Wednesday. So by Monday, when they have to pre-enter for the Breeders' Cup, we'll see if the decision on Intrepido is final. $100,000 supplement would have to be paid. But boy, he got in a lot of trouble in the American Pharoah, got through all of it, and finished up really determinedly. We took a look at that horse on this podcast last week. I think there's a lot to like about Intrepido supplementing in there. In fact, of the West Coast horses, I like him better than Brandt. To me, it's Ted Noffey and Intrepido, the two horses that we're kind of looking at most seriously right now. We'll see how they train up to the race and how everybody looks once they get out to Del Mar and get set to go for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. But a very interesting division. It could have been a lot more interesting with Napoleon Solo in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile for sure. And what about Further Ado? Was that impressive or what? I mean, I am really, really looking forward to seeing what that horse will do next up in the Kentucky Jockey Club Stakes. Churchill Downs coming up the day after Thanksgiving. Okay, so I believe that's actually 2 days after Thanksgiving. On the Saturday card will be the Kentucky Jockey Club, where we next see that runner Further Ado. To our fourth topic this week on It's Official, we keep going through some various Breeders' Cup divisions here. Our fourth topic is the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And the Sprint might be a replay of what we saw last year. We've got the top 3 finishers back. Like we talked with the Classic, we've got 3 horses back for this year's Breeders' Cup Sprint. There were 1, 2, 3 last year. They're all at a little bit different level of development, I think, this year. But one of the key stories with this, just like we talked about, a horse not going to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. We had a horse not going to the distaff in Torpedo Anna and Cavalieri. One of the horses not going to the Breeders' Cup Sprint is Bookham Dano, who right now may already have the Sprint Eclipse Award wrapped up. He has been clearly the best sprinter in the country throughout the course of the year, but the connections of Bookham Dano, Greg Sacco and company, they want to come back and run next year, and they're kind of calling it quits on the season, pulling the plug early. There's a lot of big money to be run for sprinters overseas at the early part of the year between Saudi Arabia and Dubai. Certainly that could be the temptation in there as well. Maybe the horse needed some time and, we're just hearing about it now in terms of we're going to lay him up for the rest of the year. Maybe there's a little something off with Bookham Dano that we don't know about on the surface, but Bookham Dano will not be participating in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And really, it brings you back to a little bit of a retro look to the race because last year's top 3 finishers are all expected to be back, that being Straight No Chaser, Ben Tornado, and Mulligan. Mulligan was the beaten favorite last year. Straight No Chaser got the victory, and we've been able to see Straight No Chaser back in workouts recently. Let's take a look at Straight No Chaser, the defending champ in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Here he is working just the other day, October 12th, so this workout would have been on Sunday. Working over the track at Santa Anita, half mile and 47-1 for trainer Dan Blacker. Bit of a disappointment last time out for Straight No Chaser at 3-5. He had the lead in the Santa Anita Sprint Championship and just kind of stopped. He was 2 lengths in front, ended up third, beaten 2 in that race. Run down by Imagination and Dr. Venkman, 2 horses that are expected back for the Breeders' Cup. Straight No Chaser did win the Riyadh Dirt Sprint earlier this year in Saudi Arabia, then disappointed in the Golden Shaheen in Dubai. He was off all summer, as often happens with horses who go overseas in the spring. I thought his comeback race, he was a little bit short. We'll see if he's tighter for the Breeders' Cup Sprint. He'll have to be because not only are Imagination and Dr. Venkman in the field, but last year's closest pursuers are in there as well. They include Ben Tornado, who was runner-up in this race last year. Ben Tornado, we've got some training footage of him as well. He was working at Keeneland, this video courtesy of Keeneland, on Saturday. So here's Ben Tornado in action on Saturday, training in the morning. And Ben Tornado's only had 1 start since that Breeders' Cup Sprint last year when he was second, beating a half length at 28-1. He came back in the Louisville Thoroughbred Society Stakes race on September the 13th after 10, 11 months away and won easily by 5 1/4 lengths against a pretty good cast. Skelly was in there, a good grade 3 type, Hear My Song. That was about a grade 3 level stakes race for listed company. And Ben Tornado ran a career high 108 by her speed figure, 6 furlongs and 108 2. Jose D'Angelo had him absolutely ripping to go at Churchill Downs. This workout was his second since that race. He also worked October 4th at Keeneland, came right back on cue here on October 11th. That's what you want to see, second off the layoff and after a big start like that. That race September 13th, so it took him 21 days to get back on the workout tab, a little bit longer to get back on the workout tab than maybe you'd like to see. You'd like to see him back on about 14 days, so it took a little bit out of him in the Louisville Thoroughbred Society, but then after working October 4th, he's right back on cue 7 days later, and that's what you want to see. If you like Ben Tornado, you probably should. You should like what you're seeing here. Good work. He's got the blinkers on. He runs with blinkers in all of his races except over in Saudi, and that might have been an equipment not noted in the past performances, but typically runs in blinkers, working in blinkers here for Jose D'Angelo. Ben Tornado coming into the Breeders' Cup Sprint with a chance to one-up his performance last year. He's had just one prep in between, and that sounds like a very light campaign. We've seen Midnight Loot come back in this race on very short kind of campaign and do well. Of course, you go back to, the Great DeHaas in the Breeders' Cup Mile, only having the one race in 2 years and winning the mile a couple years apart. So it wouldn't be otherworldly for Ben Tornado to come back second off the layoff and win the Breeders' Cup Sprint. If you like him, I think he's got enough in the tank to go the 6 furlongs. It's just a matter of how you think he might stack up with some of the others. Let's talk a little bit more about this Breeders' Cup Sprint division and what we're looking at in the Sprint. Some of the headliners, some California surprises this year. I put 3 new faces kind of into the mix. Dr. Venkman won the Santa Anita Sprint Championship with the upset over Straight New Chaser, or was second in that race. But he won the Pat O'Brien earlier in the year at Del Mar and beat the favorite in that one. Dr. Venkman came back and, underscored that in the Santa Anita Sprint Championship with a good second. Imagination is one of those 3 Californians I'm talking about who won the Sprint Santa Anita Sprint Championship. He did it almost laughingly easy in a hammerlock for Bob Baffert. I think Imagination is absolutely loaded for the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I'm very much looking forward to a hot pace where he might be able to do some serious damage. Imagination was just visually very, very impressive in winning the Santa Anita Sprint Championship. Then the other Californian is Lovesick Blues, who in the Bing Crosby Stakes, we thought this was a turf sprinter. He showed up in the Bing Crosby Stakes in July at 18-1 and pulled the upset in there over Hijazi World Record and others, and won Del Mar's big summer stakes race, the Bing Crosby, the grade 1 there at 18-1. So you take Lovesick Blues, you take Imagination, you take Dr. Venkman. Their West Coasters get to run out of their home stall at Del Mar. Those 3 added to what we get from the last year's top 3 finishers in the race. Add Nakatomi in there, who 2 years ago was 3rd in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Nakatomi's coming off of one of his better races that he's run. Nakatomi's race at Keeneland in the Breeders' or in the Phoenix Stakes was really a handy win for him. I didn't think he had that in him at this stage. That was one of the better performances of his career for Wesley Ward, and he's always consistent. So a Breeders' Cup Sprint, to me, lacks a super standout without Bookham Dano. Could make for a good betting race. You got the rematch from last year. How will people bet the defending champion? It'll be very interesting to see that in Straight No Chaser. And Mulligan's done very little wrong throughout the year. He just continues to kind of run his race over and over. You know what you're going to get out of Mulligan. He's going to show up, and he's going to give you a solid effort until the Forgo. That's where the wheels kind of came off for him last time. Now, can he bounce back from that? Because when you look at the consistency, Mulligan just delivered. Can he rebound off of that race in the Forgo Stakes? That was on August 23rd. It took him a month to get back on the workout tab to September 26th. Now he's had a couple works in succession, Mulligan back, but I'm a little worried about Mulligan off of that race and then needing so long to get back on the workout tab. Of last year's top 3 finishers, he's kind of at a different stage than I think some of the others. Ben Tornado is coming second off the layoff, and he feels like he's on the come. Mulligan might be, going the wrong direction, and Straight No Chaser's trying to get back to that form that he had at the end of last year and into the international journeys of this year. So those top three from last year, yes, they all come back, but they're at different stages, I think, in their form cycle and their development. One more division to talk about on the podcast this week. Of course, there are 14 Breeders' Cup divisions. We're only hitting on 5 of them in this particular week's podcast. We'll get more as we get closer to the event. And, of course, by the time we go next week, the pre-entries will have been sent in. They'll be announced 24 hours after this podcast comes out next Tuesday. So next Wednesday, we'll know the pre-entries for the Breeders' Cup. There'll be full past performances out there, and all the handicapping fun can ensue. We're going to finish things up with the Breeders' Cup Turf, which is kind of a horse we really know, and then a lot that we don't know yet. We're talking in the Breeders' Cup turf race. It's about Rebels Romance, going for a 3rd win in this race. He's 7 years old, and he just doesn't seem to have any slowdown in him. But how green is the turf grass going to get? Who else is going to show up to take him on? Sometimes when you have a really good horse for the Breeders' Cup turf, the international cast doesn't line up to, come and get them when we have a really sharp American horse. He's not an American horse, but after winning last time out in New York and his success coming here to the U.S., I think that there's some challengers for him to stop on the three-peat that are going to stay away. And how many of the Europeans are going to come to try to take him on? I think that's a big-time question as we look at the Breeders' Cup turf. Because what we know about Rebels Romance is his last in New York said, "You better run to beat me."
Red is about to cut loose from the back end of the field. Rebels Romance is now sprinting for home. Rebels Romance is trying to opening up and just is doing that. It's Rebels Romance who's clear. El Cordomus redistricting far bridge. But look at Rebels Romance just opening up on this grade 1 field. Has a 16th left to go. No doubt it's going to be Rebels Romance dominant in the grade 1 Joe Hurst Turf Classic. Rebels Romance wins it easily, redistricting second, then come El Cordomus and far bridge. 2 minutes, 25.72. Give it to Rebels Romance.
Frankie Dettori was deputizing that day for William Buick for the Godolphin runner Rebels Romance. Charlie Appleby's brought this one over to the U.S. on multiple occasions now with plenty of success. Again, the Breeders' Cup Turf winner in 2024 at Del Mar as the 9-5 favorite. He won it at almost 6-1 at Keeneland back in 2022. He's not going for 3 in a row, but he's going for 3 lifetime. And very few horses have won 3 lifetime Breeders' Cup races. You think about Beholder winning a Juvenile Fillies and 2 distaffs, and then you take Goldakova, the beautiful filly who won the Breeders' Cup Mile against the boys in 3 years. So that's rare air when you can get up to the 3-time Breeders' Cup winner category. Beholder, the filly, and then Rebels Romance. I mean, that's just Goldakova, of course, the filly. I was drawing a blank on the name there. Goldakova, Beholder, and Rebels Romance, potentially 3-time Breeders' Cup champions. $14 million in a 20 for 29 career so far for Rebels Romance. He's 7, but he doesn't look like he's slowing down whatsoever. Now, who might the international challengers be? Well, we'll take a look at a couple names to throw out there. Minnie Hawk would be the main one. This is the one we really need to get here. Minnie Hawk is a 3-year-old filly for Aidan O'Brien. Aidan O'Brien does not look to have a very big hand with the older horses in the turf races this year. He was interviewed by folks at Daily Racing Form, and he kind of gave a very limited amount of input on horses that would be coming over here. But Minnie Hawk coming off a 2nd place finish in the Arc de Triomphe. She's only a 3-year-old filly. She was favored to win the Arc. She had won the Yorkshire Oaks, the Irish Oaks, the Epsom Oaks in succession. This was just her 2nd career loss. She loses by a head in the Arc de Triomphe. If we can get Minnie Hawk over here, now we've got a race to talk about because it's not just all about Rebels Romance.
Calpana coming on the extreme right. Darius has been switched out for a run. Byzantine Dream on the left against the rails has a chance. 300 metres to go. It's Minnie Hawk who shows in front. Darius in second. Quite an all behind these. Giovaletto, Byzantine Dream running on into the closing stages. The purple jacket in front is Minnie Hawk. The green colours of Darius nearest to us is coming with the challenge to throw it down. Darius and Barcelona have won the out to Minnie Hawk. And then Sosie Giovaletto, Byzantine Dream. Arrow behind those was Arrow Eagle, and they're followed by White Birch and then Hot as Hell. Aventure.
Mini Hawk, 3-year-old filly, she would vie for favoritism, I believe. And if you look at the international betting markets, at least a very clear second choice in the Breeders' Cup Turf. Goliath, an international globetrotter, his connections say they will pay the $200,000 supplement. John Stewart, the owner of Goliath on X, saying that they'll pay the $200,000 supplement to run this multiple Group 1 winner from around the world in the Breeders' Cup. Wimbledon Hawkeye, we already saw that 3-year-old come over here and win the Nashville Derby earlier this year for James Owen. He won that race at Kentucky Downs, and a horse who's a Group 2 level runner over in Europe. Certainly that would add a little bit with the 3-year-olds from Europe coming here. Gold Phoenix, the top of the Americans, perhaps. He's really underappreciated in America. I know
coming on the extreme.
I know that some of the East Coast fans out there probably turn their nose up and say that, how can you really say that that's the best horse in the U.S., Gold Phoenix? But when you look at his career resume, there's a lot there to it with Gold Phoenix. 4-time winner of the Del Mar Handicap. That you could say there's not many great horses in the West Coast in the turf ranks. That may be true. But if you look, Gold Phoenix last year in the Breeders' Cup Turf, 4th of 13. He did not embarrass himself whatsoever. Breeders' Cup Turf 2023 at Santa Anita, 4th of another big field in there of 11. He's run 4th in the last 2 editions of the Breeders' Cup Turf. We don't have many American horses, period, who can claim to have run top 4 in the Breeders' Cup more than once. So you have a 2-time top 4 finisher in the Breeders' Cup Turf in Gold Phoenix, 4-time Del Mar Handicap winner over this course. I don't look at him to have any chance to win it. And if the top Europeans show up again, I don't think he can beat Rebels Romance. If Mini Hawk's here, I don't think he can beat that one. But Gold Phoenix for 3rd or 4th, somewhere along the line, deserves a little bit of appreciation. And at age 7, he's 10 for 28. He's earned $2 million, over $1 million of that at Del Mar with those 4 victories in the Del Mar Handicap. I just thought he deserves a little bit of a salute because when you look up and down the line at the potential American horses that might run in this race, they are very few and far between. Maybe Mike Makerson's Old Crazy Bone, former $100,000 claim that just won the Turf Cup at Kentucky Downs last time out. There's not a lot of American interest in the Breeders' Cup Turf. I don't think they want to line up again and take on the great Rebels Romance. Hopefully we get Mini Hawk, the 3-year-old filly. Then it's race on. And again, be no surprise whatsoever if Gold Phoenix gets a share of the Breeders' Cup Turf. He's done it before, twice. See if he can do it 3 years in a row. That's going to wrap up our 5 topics this week on It's Official. We got ourselves a classic. We started with that, talking about how great this year's Breeders' Cup Classic field looks with Sovereignty and the good 3-year-olds taking on the top 3 finishers from last year's Breeders' Cup Classic. Who Dat in the distaff? She's on the farm right now, so Torpedo Anna does not look like she's headed to the distaff. Who could step up? Cavalieri is out at this point. The 3-year-olds haven't done much. Could be all about seismic beauty there. The juveniles missing out on a couple buzzsaws from New York and Kentucky, but still the headliners, Ted Nafi and Brandt, the horses who in the juvenile are going to take the most attention. The sprint might be a replay. We've got the top 3 finishers from last year's race goal coming back. We got a chance to see some training from the runner-up, Ben Tornado. We got to see some training as well from the defending champ, that being Straight No Chaser. And how green will the turf grass get? How many horses want to come in and take on 2-time Breeders' Cup Turf winner Rebels Romance? That will be the big question. Let's hope we can get Mini Hawk. Those 5 topics are now official. Because Jeff Siegel, the creator of this show, and I say so. That's the way we do it. We'll do it all again in 7 days' time on Tuesday when I'm back for another look at some Breeders' Cup divisions. We'll have some more news and notes about the Breeders' Cup Championships that are now just 17 days away at the time of recording this podcast. On behalf of everybody with First Bet and Express Bet, I'm Jeremy Plonk. Have a great week. I'll see you on Friday when Scott Shapiro and I on the First Call podcast handicap some weekend stakes. Have a great week, everybody.